Elliotte, in my hockey life, because we all have a number of different lives,
Yes.
but in my hockey life, there is nowhere that I would rather be right now on January 1st, as we record this podcast at 3:56 Eastern, than right here at Fenway Park in advance of the Winter Classic.
Now, let me make sure I have this correct.
Yes.
You have never been to a baseball game here.
Maiden voyage at Fenway. If you told 12-year-old me that I would be at Fenway Park not to see a baseball game, but to see a hockey game, I don't know how I would have reacted. But here I am. I've always wanted to go to Fenway. I know you've been. I've started to check off some baseball boxes in my life. Wrigley last year. Do want to get to Comiskey. But Fenway is a huge one for me.
Jeff, I am disgusted by this information. What are you doing with your life?
No, I know. It's ridiculous. I've always put off getting to Fenway, but here I am nonetheless. Yeah. So here it is, the podcast. Like, this is a pretty cool thing to do too. So Elliotte and I are on top of the Green Monster right now. This is 32 Thoughts, a podcast brought to you by GMC and the Sierra AT4X. We're on top of the Green Monster. Tomorrow is the Winter Classic, but it is January 1st. Yeah. And I want to ask you one bit of trivia that I got from Stan Narodka, our stats man at Hockey Night in Canada. Who holds the record for most goals scored by an NHLer born on January 1st? The answer is in this game.
Oh, really? Who's a New Year's baby in this game? Who is it?
His name rhymes with Meth Martyr. Jeff Carter with 424 goals.
Oh my God, that was by the way your best bit that you've ever done on the podcast. His name rhymes with Meth Marmer. That was good.
Yeah, thanks. Bobby Holik is number 2, by the way.
That was really good. So if you've never been to Fenway Park, well, first of all, I should say that I believe this is the 18th outdoor game I've been to since it started again in 2003 with the Heritage Classic between the Canadiens and the Oilers at Commonwealth Stadium.
And you just started thawing out after that one. You've just finally thawed.
That was cold, but a great event. One of the highlights of my career. I went to the first 8, and then I think this is the 18th I've been to. And, you know, I mentioned to some people that we were going to this today, and they're like, I've seen it. I'm not really into it anymore. Look, I get it. I get it why some people think that. But I used to think that too. Mm-hmm. You know, when I was going to all those ones early on, it'd be like, another one. And then you'd get there and you'd be caught up in the excitement. Like, we're here with our crew, our great crew have worked really hard today. When we got into Fenway and we walked out of that corridor onto the field, it really does take your breath away. And you get caught up in the excitement, and you realize you're here, and you look at Pesky's pole in right field, and you realize that TV does not do that justice.
Yeah. And
you look at the Green Monster, and like you said, we're sitting on top of the monster seats, and you see the rink here. You get caught up in it. This is going to be a lot of fun, and I haven't been to as many of these in the last few years, particularly ones that have been in the United States. I'm really excited to be back.
The sights, the sounds, the games, the music as well, which is a big part of it. The festival, which is a big part of it as well. The horns, which is right now signaling for the Boston Bruins and their families to get off the ice so they can flood and allow the Pittsburgh Penguins a chance to skate here. We're going to hear from Steve Mayer, by the way, NHL, who essentially Steve... I mean, one of his many titles is Chief Content Officer, but he puts a lot of these tentpole events together. You're going to hear from him in a couple of moments here, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on these two teams specifically and where they're at, because I look at Pittsburgh and I look at Boston, and there's a couple of symmetries here. I mean, there's the Boston Bruins, obviously. They're hosting the Pittsburgh Penguins, who are owned by Fenway. We're at Fenway. And both these teams have an element of we're keeping the band together for a couple of more swings at this thing. We made a lot about Malkin and Letang re-upping, Crosby obviously still there, Brian Rust, keeping the band together to try to squeeze some more out of this group that's already delivered Stanley Cups. Say the same thing about the Boston Bruins. We didn't know that Patrice Bergeron was coming back. We didn't know that David Krejci was coming back. The David Pastrnak contract question, that hangs out there and looms over the Boston Bruins organization and their future. Where is Elliotte Friedman at with both these teams?
Look, the Boston Bruins are number one in the league. They're a serious Stanley Cup contender. Now, there's a number of Bruin fans wondering about a report that came on the weekend about David Pastrnak closing in on a contract extension 8 times 11. I believe that's premature. Now, I do think it's possible that that is a contract that the Bruins have to consider doing. It wouldn't shock me if when this is all over, that David Pastrnak re-signs in Boston for something that's right around 8 times 11. But I think it's premature right now. I don't think it's anywhere near close to that. But I do think that, the Bruins know that that's something they're going to have to think about. And again, Jeff, I've said it to you several times. I think they're going to have to do it, or at least something close to that. I really do. So I think Boston could win the Stanley Cup this year. I think the more interesting question is, what are they going to add? Do they think that they have to add a big piece? Do they think they have to add a couple of smaller pieces? When the Boston Bruins take a look at trying to win the Stanley Cup this year, which they're going to do, I'm going to be very curious about what they see as it's important for them to do.
Last year, at the beginning of the season, when a couple of defensemen were making headlines, John Klingberg and Jacob Chikrin, Boston was one of those teams that did inquire, a lot of teams did, about Jacob Chikrin. We all know they did the Hampus Lindholm deal. He's a huge part, so I don't know that they take a swing for a big defenseman. Mm-hmm. If anything, like anyone else, like any team that has an elite squad and has aspirations and expectations of going deep, what do we always hear? Depth.
Yeah.
Depth. I don't know that I see Boston taking huge swings here, like Bo Horvat swings. Do you?
To me, if they're doing Horvat, they're doing it because they think they can sign him.
And that might be an indication of one of the other centers as well.
Like that's the thing. I always, if you listen to this podcast, you've heard me say things like, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. Why did Boston do Lindholm? Because they could keep him. One of the things that's happening in this market this year is that you look at what has happened in the past couple of years. David Savard got a first and a third rounder. Claude Giroux got a first rounder and Owen Tippett. Ben Sherratt got a first rounder that looms very large right now and a prospect for Montreal. You're the draft guy. You know these players better than me. There's a lot of teams that aren't crazy about trading their first-round picks this year.
Yes.
And there's a lot of teams that are trying to. Now, I think this is easier said in January than it is in February or March. But I do get the sense right now that there's a lot of teams saying that we think the prices paid the last couple of years were outrageous, and we don't want to do that again. I think it's easy to say. I think it's much harder to do. But I look at Boston.
Hang on, it's one pause on one side. Is that managers saying that, or is that because I don't believe that there's owners saying that?
No,
I think owners look at that and say it's just going to be a first-round pick, and you mean I might get a Stanley Cup out of it?
I think there's even some managers who say that. That's why it's poker right now. But look, I think right now they're trying to. I think some of these teams feel that there's going to be more supply out there. There's a couple of elite players, but other than that, if you decide to go for depth, they think there's going to be some options. To me, if the Bruins are doing something like that, say for argument's sake, Bo Horvat, I'm wondering if they're thinking they're going to be able to sign him.
A couple of things on Pittsburgh here then quickly. We wonder what the Boston Bruins might be up to now that the calendar is turned and we have eyes, pro scouting meetings are happening and managers are getting all their ducks in a row and getting to business in advance of trade deadline. We talk about what the Boston Bruins may be up to. What about the Penguins?
See, I look at the Penguins, and I always start from the bottom of they're going for it, right? Because they always go for it.
You don't re-up with Malkin and Letang.
Without doing it. I'm really curious to know, what do the Penguins think they are? What do they think they are? Because they've had some wild swings this year, and they've had some guys like Dumoulin, who I really like, hasn't had a great season. Kapanen, who I've always thought had all the tools to be a heck of a player, has had a wildly inconsistent season.
At times, he's looked real good, Friedge.
Like that's the thing. When I look at Pittsburgh, I just wonder about, what do they think they really have here, and where and they're a team that doesn't have a lot of room and flexibility to do things. So I think if they do something, it's going to be close to the end before the deadline. So they have time to figure this out. Like, one of the teams we talked about on Saturday night was Toronto. I think Toronto's taking a step back from what they thought they were going to do to now we have some more time to figure out what we really need. I still think that when I look at Pittsburgh, I still feel the same way. You know, what do they think they are, and where do they think they really need the most help? Because I think, like, I look at a guy like Dumoulin in particular, who I really like as a player, and the year he's had, they're probably thinking, we're not going to need to worry about this year.
Yeah.
And now, unfortunately, they've kind of looked at it and said, we got to wait to see what we've really got here.
You know, I just don't know that after you do the deals with Rust and Malkin and Letang, how you go into any season, approach any deadline, and not say we have to go for it. Like, that's why we brought these guys back.
I'm not doubting at all they're going for it. I just wonder if they're kind of sitting here and thinking, like, for example, I got a call this morning, and this is just spitballing. I don't want anyone to go crazy with this. But we were talking briefly last night about Jake McCabe.
Yep.
And, Jake McCabe, The Athletic had a couple of really interesting interviews this week with some of the Chicago players, like Ian Mitchell, frustrated he hasn't been playing very much. I don't think I think the Blackhawks feel they're going to sort that one out. Jake McCabe, basically he's close to home, close to where he grew up. He went to Chicago for a reason, but he's been in Buffalo and Chicago. He's never had an opportunity to win, and he wants to win. And I don't think the Blackhawks are in any hurry to trade Jake McCabe, because I think they really like him. But I think they also recognize that this is a player who wants to win, and there are going to be teams, and I think Edmonton would potentially be one of them, that are going to call and say, what are you thinking here? And, someone called me this morning. He said, for argument's sake, if I was Pittsburgh, that would be a guy that I would be calling Chicago and saying, look, he's locked in. You know what his number is. Is that a guy that would make any sense for Pittsburgh? So, but at the beginning of the year, you're probably not thinking that. So that's the point I'm trying to make, Jeff, is that I think they're still going for it, but I wonder if they're trying to figure out what exactly it is they have to go after first.
I want to hear from Steve Mayer here in a couple of moments. Quickly before we get there, we talk about checking boxes if you're a player, things you want to do. First goal, first fight, first Stanley Cup playoff game, Stanley Cup, all of it, trophies. How much does this mean to players now? Like, when you join the NHL, when you make it to the NHL, how many of these guys are now saying, by the time it's done, I want to have played in at least one of these?
I think that...
There's the horn. Check the lights.
I don't know if I don't know where on the list it would be, but the one thing I do think is that the players who do play in it really love it. They really love it.
Well, you can see it with the families out there.
Yes, the family skate is big, but also I think it breaks up your season. It's different. It's unique. And you remember the first one, how cold it was, how brittle the ice was. Like, that's the story about that first game.
The Edmonton-Montreal one?
Yeah, Edmonton-Montreal.
The no-hitter?
The no-hitter. And you've told this story before on the pod. Like, that game was close to not getting played.
Oh, yeah.
And the players just said, no, like, the 50-50's $300 million. We can't not play this.
Now, there was an agreement, so everybody knows, between both teams that nobody was going to hit. I know hockey fans hate hearing that, but go back and watch the game. Montreal and Edmonton both agreed, no one's hitting out here. It's too cold.
But if you take a look at, for example, and they've had some unfortunate situations, like a couple of years ago in Tahoe, which I thought was a great idea.
Oh, it looks so good.
It was like,
I know.
I hate when people punish good ideas. Like, it was a good idea. The sun was a problem. They had to reschedule, but I thought it was really a good thing. They're so much better now at putting the rink together, they've come so far in the technology around it. I think it's something players really do like.